regularly have conversations with my kids about active consent.
Consent is a big topic. Let's dive a little deeper. When you were a kid, were you allowed to say no? Were you forced to kiss that grandma you saw once a year on the lips, no matter how uncomfortable you were? Or were you ever tickled to the point of tears, and when you got upset, you were told, quit overreacting, you're being a baby? No, maybe it's just me, but my lack of a right to autonomy has really made my life hard as an adult. People pleasing and my fear of saying no and standing up for myself still affect me. To this day, I still struggle with that, but I'm setting my kids up for success.
But I think it's incredibly important that our actions are consistent with our words when we're teaching consent. I don't want my kids to think their right to bodily autonomy is conditional.
My actions being consistent with my words is carried out through big things and little things. I can't tell my kids that they have a right to make decisions about their bodies and set boundaries and then violate them because I want hugs and snuggles. Now, that doesn't mean that every interaction we have is some big in-depth conversation, but when I put my arms out for a hug, that's a question. That is asking them for consent without using words.
When I was a kid, I was expected to hug and kiss everyone at a family function, despite how I felt about it. If I didn't want to, I was either getting in trouble or guilt tripped.
When I was a kid, we would go to my family's house for Christmas Eve every year, which was usually the only day of the year I saw this family. So surprisingly, I didn't want to hug or kiss any of them because I didn't know them. They were virtually strangers to me. But my family didn't care about that because they loved me. So there was this strict expectation that I would give in and give hugs and kisses, and if I didn't, I would be in trouble. Nothing like forced affection to show your love, am I right? I mean, there was a few years I was literally paid a quarter to give people hugs that I didn't know. That made me uncomfortable. Honestly, still kind of makes me feel uncomfortable now. My feelings and autonomy were violated as a child so that my adult family members would feel better. I am never going to be a part of making my children feel that way, and I am never going to let other adults try to make my children feel that way.
Like, if you don't hug and kiss this uncle you haven't seen in a year, he's going to be sad. The thing is, I didn't care then and I don't care now, and I carry that energy into my parenting.
When I bring my kids to family functions, we discuss how we might handle family interactions on the ride there. The most important thing being, you are in charge of your body the whole time. So yeah, you have to be polite and say hello. But whether that hello comes with a wave or a high five or a hug, that's up to you and your comfort level. And if you're unsure of yourself or you're feeling insecure, you've got backup. It's me, I'm the backup. Now you might be thinking, it's not that big of a deal, it's not that deep. How can an uncomfortable hug impact a person that much? Or you might even be thinking, well, I had to have uncomfortable hugs with family members I hardly knew and I turned out fine. And that might be true for you, but we don't get to decide how other people feel about things, and we definitely don't get to decide how different situations are going to impact our kids. But even beyond the awkward Christmas affection was this general inability to say no in situations I was uncomfortable in. This greatly impacted me in future situations. When I got older into my teen years and I was being pressured and I found myself in uncomfortable situations, I didn't know how to say no. I never had any practice. I thought I wasn't allowed to, so I didn't. I just went along with things and didn't protest in the same way I was taught to my entire childhood. The trauma that caused me. So even now, after years of therapy and working on myself, I still struggle to say no and set boundaries. So when it comes to my kids, I don't just let them say no, I encourage it. Set your boundaries. Tell me how you feel. I want to hear it.
So if I have a family member who's upset I won't make my kid hug them, well, their feelings are their responsibility and my kid's well-being is mine.
Seriously though, I've heard adults tell children, stop acting like a baby, and then turn around and throw a whole tantrum when they don't get the behavior they want out of a child. So if an adult is upset that my kid won't hug them, well, that's not my problem. An adult should have the emotional capacity to cope with the disappointment that comes from not getting a hug from a 4-year-old. And if they don't, well, my job is to parent my kids, not another adult. Have I had to speak up for one of my kids and say, hey, she said she didn't want to hug you and you need to respect that? Yes. Would I do it again? Yes. And I do it in front of my kids. Now, some folks might say it's inappropriate, but I think it's important for my kids to see me stand up for them so they know it's okay to stand up for themselves. Authority figures don't have authority over your body.
A boundary set by a child holds just as much weight as an adult.
A boundary set by a child holds just as much weight as a boundary set by an adult. Now, there is a necessary power imbalance in a parent-child relationship. However, children have the right to set boundaries and have their own autonomy. If a child feels safe enough to say, "Give me space, I don't want a hug, don't touch me," that needs to be respected. A kid can't grow up without the ability to say no and set boundaries and then suddenly be expected to do so and do so effectively when they reach a certain age.
I teach my kids that they're in charge of their bodies when it comes to things like affection and physical play, but at the same time, when it comes to other folks, they have to get consent.
This comes up most when my kids are playing together physically. We're talking tickle fights and roughhousing, when suddenly that switch happens from giggles to distress, and I'm left saying, "Squirrely girls, read the room." Consent can be given or taken at any time, and the word no isn't the only way to say no. We need to be aware of body language, attitude, and comfort levels.
On a few occasions, one of my kids has come to me upset that her sister wouldn't give her a hug, to which my reply is always, if she doesn't give consent to a hug right now, you don't get to give her a hug. We have to respect people's boundaries.
This is where we circle back to coping with disappointment from not getting to hug a 4-year-old. In my house, we talk about boundaries all the time. Even as a parent, I set boundaries. I get touched out, which can be tricky with 3 kids who love cuddles. And while I also love cuddles, I also get overwhelmed. So I always tell my kids, I am setting a boundary. I am setting a boundary because I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. I am setting a boundary because I just don't want to be touched right now. And so then I will give my kids an option that they can take instead. You can sit next to me, not on top of me. One of the things I've loved to realize is the impact these conversations really have on my kids. They talk about boundaries with each other. My middleest kiddo has had some trouble with a friend at school who has trouble respecting her boundaries. Her friend is very hands-on, touchy-feely, and my daughter is very don't touch me. And so when her friend isn't respecting her boundaries, she talks to her and she talks to her teacher and she talks to me. Well, she talked to her sister too. And her sister said, you know, maybe she's still learning about boundaries like our littlest sister. Maybe it would be helpful for you to explain your boundaries and say, these are my boundaries. Hearing little kids have these conversations is both adorable and endearing. They really do understand these concepts, and the things that I say to them are really sinking in.
It's also important to me that my kids understand consent isn't a commitment.
You can revoke consent at any time. The second you're unhappy with an interaction, you can change your mind. You don't have to continue engaging in something because you're afraid of how it'll make the other person feel if you don't. And sure, that means sometimes someone is going to be sad about it, but that's okay. We're not responsible for making other people feel better by sacrificing our own comfort.
Say my kids are roughhousing and suddenly I hear one of them yell no or stop. I am immediately there to make sure that new boundary is heard and respected.
I am so quick to interject if I need to. Now, the ages my kids are at now, they're pretty good at responding appropriately. But now and then I have to be like, hey, I heard a stop. Stop means stop right now, not when you feel like it. Or, hey, that sounds like maybe she's not having fun anymore. Maybe back off and check in, huh?
Every night before I go to bed, I go through my house and give everyone a kiss on the forehead. Last night I got to my 3-year-old's room and she looked at me and said, no kiss. I said, you don't want a kiss? And she said no. And I said, well, can I have one? And then she said no. So I said, okay, because no is a full sentence. I didn't need to ask why.
No is a full sentence. I let my kids feel the power of that by not asking for an explanation. Now, there is nuance here. There are some no's that are conversation starters, but when it comes to their body, when it comes to affection, no just means no.
This morning she wanted all the hugs and kisses. Consent is conditional. Respecting boundaries is not.
Consent should be enthusiastic and can be taken away at any time. Respecting someone's boundaries is always a priority.
And I know some folks might say it's not that deep, but I think it is.
I would rather do too much than too little. I want my kids to feel confident in themselves and their autonomy.
Being able to say no and set boundaries when they're young will empower them to do so when they're older and the stakes are higher. It's important.
Consent is an ongoing, ever-changing conversation with kids. I always keep it age appropriate, but that conversation starts when they're toddlers and expands as they get older, as their social life changes, as their understanding of the world changes. I don't want to raise people pleasers who are afraid to say no. I want to raise respectful people who are confident in setting boundaries and standing up for themselves in any situation. Anyway, thanks for being here, friends. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit the bell. You know the drill. I'll see you next week. Okay, bye.